Amara stepped into her parents' house in Accra, carrying a small gift bag and a polite smile, expecting the usual warmth of family chatter. The air was alive with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the familiar aroma of jollof rice and grilled tilapia. Relatives moved between the living room and dining area, sharing stories and teasing one another, while children ran past, squealing with excitement. It felt like any other family gathering, comfortable and familiar. But as soon as Amara greeted her parents, she sensed a subtle shift. Her father, Kofi, gave her a long, measured look before making an offhand comment about her new apartment. "It's such a perfect place for Nia," he said casually, almost too casually, while her mother, Abina, gave a nervous smile and nodded. At first, Amara thought she misheard, but the way her extended family exchanged knowing glances made her stomach tighten. There was an expectation in the air, quiet but heavy, like a shadow lurking behind the laughter. Amara tried to mask her surprise, raising her glass in a polite toast, but inside, a storm was brewing. She had worked so hard for that apartment, saving every Sadie, juggling her small business and her cafe in Tima, sacrificing late nights and weekends. The thought that her parents might expect her to hand it over to Nia, without even asking, felt like a betrayal wrapped in a smile. As conversations continued around her, Amara's eyes kept catching those secretive looks, and she realized that tonight's dinner was going to be far from ordinary. Something was about to happen, and she had no idea how her family would react when she finally spoke her mind. Amara's life in Tima was built on routine, hard work, and quiet determination. Every morning, she woke before the sun, brewing coffee for her small cafe while setting out fresh pastries and arranging the tables just so. Her cafe was modest, but it had charm, a place where neighbors and students gathered, chatting over cappuccinos and homemade muffins. After serving the early crowd, she would head to the corner of the shop where her handcrafted jewelry was displayed. Each piece told a story: delicate beads threaded together by hand, necklaces shaped from local stones, bracelets woven with care. Customers loved the personal touch, and word was slowly spreading. It hadn't been easy getting here. Amara remembered her first big paycheck from selling a batch of bracelets at a weekend market. She had held the money in her hands, counting each Sadie over and over, disbelief and pride mingling in her chest. That day, she felt closer than ever to her dream of owning a home, a place she could call entirely her own. But the joy came with sacrifices. Nights were long, sometimes stretching into the early hours as she balanced bookkeeping for the cafe, packaging jewelry orders, and planning her next move. Weekends weren't for rest. They were for markets, deliveries, and meeting clients. Friends would invite her out, and she often had to decline, preferring to save every Sadie toward her goal. There were moments when she doubted herself. When the cafe's old coffee machine broke down, she borrowed money from a small loan, worrying she might fall behind. When a customer returned a custom order, she felt frustration and defeat, but she reminded herself that setbacks were part of the journey. Her parents sometimes commented on her constant work, suggesting she relax, but she knew this was her path, one she had chosen, and was determined to walk alone. Little victories kept her going. A neighbor complimenting a bracelet, a loyal customer returning every week, her cafe slowly filling with familiar faces. All these small successes added fuel to her determination. And finally, after months of disciplined saving, careful spending, and pushing herself harder than ever, Amara signed the papers for her apartment. It was a modest place, just enough for her independence, but it represented freedom, hard-won achievement, and a dream realized through sweat and patience. So when her parents casually suggested at the family gathering that the apartment would be perfect for Nia, it cut deeper than Amara expected. It wasn't just a house. It was the product of years of sacrifice, of sleepless nights, and relentless effort. The thought that anyone, even her sister, might casually claim it as if it were a given felt like a betrayal. Every bead she threaded, every coffee she brewed, every early morning and late night suddenly flashed in her mind, and she realized that she couldn't let all of that hard work be diminished by polite family expectations. This was her life, her achievement, and she had fought too hard to give it away without standing up for herself. The chatter in the living room was lively, filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses, when Kofi leaned back in his chair, a proud smile on his face. "Nia's idea for a boutique is brilliant," he said, nodding toward his younger daughter. "I really think she has an eye for business." His voice carried warmth, but there was something else lurking beneath it, something that made Amara's stomach twist. Before she could respond, he added almost casually, "And that apartment of yours, Amara, it would be perfect for Nia, don't you think?" The words landed like a stone thrown into a calm pond. Amara froze mid-sip of her drink, her mind racing. Perfect for Nia? Her apartment, the place she had worked years to buy, saving every Sadie, every coin from her cafe and jewelry sales. She felt a surge of shock, followed by frustration she struggled to contain. Around the room, she noticed the subtle exchange of glances. Her mother giving Kofi a nervous smile, some relatives looking slightly uncomfortable, as if they knew what was coming next but weren't sure how to stop it. Abina, always the more cautious of the two, leaned slightly toward Kofi and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Her smile was tight, polite, the kind that hid a mix of anxiety and expectation. Amara sensed the unspoken message. This was a family ritual, a quiet test of obedience or generosity, and she was expected to comply without question. But inside, she was boiling. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but she stayed quiet, keeping her composure. She knew that raising her voice now, in front of everyone, would only feed the drama her parents seemed to be orchestrating. As the conversation continued, Kofi and Abina subtly circled back to the topic, praising Nia's ambition while dropping more hints about the apartment. Each comment was like a needle, poking at the pride and independence Amara had fought so hard to build. She glanced around the room, noticing friends and distant relatives shifting in their seats, exchanging awkward looks. They were waiting for her reaction, expecting the polite daughter to smile, nod, and accept this quietly presented plan. Amara's mind raced through years of sacrifices, the late nights in Tima working on jewelry, the early mornings running her cafe, the careful budgeting, the tiny celebrations she had delayed to save for this very apartment. How could her parents act as if it were up for grabs? She felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her, a mix of family loyalty, tradition, and unspoken pressure that threatened to silence her. But she also felt something else, clarity. She knew she couldn't let this moment define her, couldn't let years of hard work be diminished by polite smiles and secret nudges. So she stayed quiet for now, holding her expression steady, sipping her drink as if nothing had happened. But deep down, she made a promise to herself. When the time came, she would speak, and when she did, everyone would understand that this was her life, her achievement, and her boundaries. The tension hung in the air, subtle yet electric, signaling that the evening was about to take a turn, and that her family's expectation of compliance was about to collide with Amara's hard-earned independence. Even as Amara sipped her drink and forced a polite smile, she couldn't help but notice Nia laughing across the room, effortlessly drawing everyone into her orbit. Nia had always been the charming one, bright, outgoing, with a way of making people feel like she was the center of their attention. But there was another side to that charm, one Amara had learned to recognize over the years, a quiet sense of entitlement. Nia rarely had to work for anything. Gifts, support, and opportunities seemed to come to her naturally, flowing from their parents as if she were owed the world. Amara remembered childhood vividly. While Nia's birthdays were celebrated with elaborate parties, complete with balloons, music, and carefully chosen gifts, Amara had learned early that she couldn't rely on anyone but herself. She remembered walking to school with secondhand books, carefully counting the sadies she earned from tutoring neighbors to pay for her school fees. Nia, on the other hand, had new uniforms each term, and when she wanted something extra, like a new doll or fancy shoes, it was simply bought for her. There had always been a quiet, unspoken hierarchy in the house, one that favored charm and charisma over hard work and grit. Even as adults, the pattern persisted. Nia had always received encouragement for her ideas, often accompanied by immediate financial support. Kofi and Abina spoke enthusiastically about her boutique plans, promising guidance, sometimes even funding, before she had proven anything. Amara, however, had learned to fend for herself, to stretch every sadie, to turn small opportunities into tangible results. Her cafe and jewelry business weren't just passions, they were survival, her way of carving independence in a world that seemed eager to hand favors to her sister. There were moments that stung, reminders of the imbalance. Amara thought of last Christmas, when Nia received a carefully wrapped tablet, while she had gifted Nia something handmade from her jewelry collection. Everyone had praised the tablet as if it were proof of parental love, overlooking the effort Amara had poured into her gift. That was the rhythm of their relationship. Nia took and was celebrated for it. Amara gave and was expected to stay quiet. Yet, despite the unfairness, Amara never let bitterness define her. Her hard work had given her strength, resilience, and a tangible achievement in the form of her apartment. She often reflected on those years of balancing school, work, and responsibilities, realizing that each sacrifice had built not just her independence, but a sense of self-respect. She knew her worth wasn't measured by parental approval or extravagant gifts. It was measured by what she could create and sustain on her own. As she watched Nia laugh and mingle, the contrast was clear. Nia had always had an easier path, one paved with family support and unearned advantages. Amara had had to build every step herself. And tonight, with the apartment suddenly at the center of discussion, that contrast wasn't just personal, it was a statement. All those years of hard work, determination, and quiet sacrifice were about to be put to the test, and Amara was ready to prove that independence mattered more than charm or privilege. Dinner had started, and the table was alive with conversation, the clatter of plates, and the scent of grilled fish and spiced rice filling the air. Amara sat quietly, listening as her parents steered the conversation toward Nia. Nia has always been ambitious, Kofi said, his voice warm, yet carrying that subtle push. Her boutique idea is just the beginning. I can see her thriving in life, and of course, Amara's new apartment would be perfect for her when the time comes. A polite murmur ran through the guests. Some nodded, unsure how to react, while others exchanged glances that made Amara's chest tighten. It wasn't a question. They were assuming, announcing, almost claiming her hard-earned apartment as if it were a family hand-me-down. Abina smiled nervously, giving small nods, reinforcing the unspoken expectation. The tension in the room was quiet but thick, a kind of pressure that seemed to push down on Amara's shoulders. She felt the familiar surge of frustration, but she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached for her glass of wine, her hands steady, her expression calm. She waited for the right moment, letting the chatter ebb for a brief silence. Then she raised her glass and smiled, a smile that started warm and gentle. I want to make a toast, she began, her voice soft but carrying across the table. To family, to love, and to celebrating each other's dreams. She let that linger, letting the guests smile politely, thinking she was playing along. But, she continued, her tone shifting just slightly, firm enough to catch attention, I also want to celebrate hard work, persistence, and independence. This apartment, she said, letting her gaze sweep across the table, landing on her parents, then on Nia, is something I worked for. Every late night, every early morning, every small step in building my cafe and my jewelry business led to this moment. It is mine, and it represents the life I am creating with my own effort. A flicker of shock crossed faces around the table. Guests exchanged awkward glances. Nia's smile faltered, her eyes widening slightly. Kofi opened his mouth but didn't speak, caught off guard by the calm confidence in Amara's declaration. Abina's polite smile tightened, and a ripple of whispers moved through the room. Amara continued, her voice steady. I love seeing Nia succeed, and I will always support her dreams, just as I have worked to support my own. But this apartment is not a gift to be handed over. It is proof of what dedication can achieve, and it will remain mine. She raised her glass higher, not in confrontation, but in ownership and pride. To independence, to dreams realized, and to honoring the work that brings them to life. For a moment, the room was silent. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the casual nods, all paused. Every eye was on her, and the shift in energy was unmistakable. Amara had taken what her parents had presented as a given and turned it into a public statement of self-respect. She had not shouted or demanded, yet she had claimed her ground. The toast was not just words, it was a declaration, and everyone at that table, from relatives to friends, understood that she was no longer just the polite daughter who quietly followed expectations. She was a force, and the apartment was hers. The moment Amara finished her toast, the room froze. Nia's fork paused midair, her jaw dropping slightly as her eyes widened in disbelief. She opened her mouth, maybe to speak, but no words came out. For a second, she just stared at Amara. The laughter and chatter from a moment ago vanished, leaving a heavy, almost electric silence. Her parents were equally stunned. Kofi's hand hovered above his glass, his eyebrows raised in surprise, and Abina's polite smile faltered. Her lips pressed together as if she were trying to figure out the right response. The small nods and murmurs that had accompanied their earlier comments about the apartment were gone, replaced by wide-eyed silence. Guests who had been quietly sipping drinks or exchanging polite words leaned forward, whispering to one another in disbelief. Did she just? Someone murmured under their breath. Another shook their head, clearly caught off guard by the unexpected declaration. Even the children, who had been running around earlier, stopped in their tracks, sensing the sudden tension. It was as if the air itself had thickened, heavy with the weight of Amara's word. The warmth and casual comfort of a family dinner had shifted into a charged space where something unspoken had been loudly declared. Everyone in the room was aware that this was a turning point. Amara stayed calm, her posture relaxed, her glass held steadily. She let the silence linger for a moment, allowing the impact of her words to settle in. She didn't shout, didn't glare, didn't raise her voice. Her confidence and composure spoke louder than any argument could. The calmness in her eyes, the firm set of her jaw, and the subtle, unapologetic pride in her tone made it clear that this was no mere comment. It was a boundary, firmly established. Nia, still frozen, glanced at her parents as if seeking support, but Kofi and Abina looked uncertain, caught between tradition, expectations, and the undeniable strength of their older daughter. Guests whispered, exchanged glances, and shifted uncomfortably in their seats, all captivated by Amara's quiet authority. The usual rhythm of a family dinner had completely shifted. Amara had become the center of attention, not through drama or shouting, but through clarity and control. The tension in the room was almost tangible, the kind of moment people would recount later with disbelief and admiration. In that pause, everyone understood that Amara wasn't just defending her apartment, she was reclaiming her independence, asserting her worth, and refusing to be diminished by polite expectations or familial pressure. The room remained still, the shock lingering, as Amara's calm confidence silently commanded respect, leaving no doubt that she had drawn a line, and nothing would make her step back. Before the apartment, before the cafe, before the jewelry business, Amara's story began in the bustling streets of Kumasi. She grew up in a modest home, where love was plentiful but resources were limited. From a young age, she learned that nothing came without effort. While other kids spent their afternoons playing freely, Amara often carried small bags of goods to sell at the local market, helping to support the household. She balanced homework and chores, understanding early that independence required sacrifice. School was another challenge. Amara loved learning, but her parents sometimes doubted her ambitions, quietly questioning whether she could manage on her own. She remembered moments when relatives remarked, almost casually, that she might never make it, that independence was too big a dream for someone her age. Instead of letting it discourage her, she used it as fuel. She worked part-time jobs, tutoring younger students, helping neighbors with errands, and even assisting at local shops, saving every sadi she could. Each coin was a building block toward something bigger. There were nights when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. She would study by the dim glow of a small lamp, her hands aching from hours of threading beads for her jewelry, or from folding pastry boxes for the cafe she would one day open. One vivid memory stayed with her, counting the money from her first significant sale, a modest sum, yet it felt like treasure. She had walked the long streets of Kumasi to deposit it herself, imagining that one day, those coins would add up to something real, something all her own. Even the small victories were meaningful. A neighbor's compliment on her bracelets, a loyal customer returning week after week, or successfully catering her first small event. Each moment reinforced that she could carve her path. Every setback, like a delayed payment or a returned order, taught her patience and resilience. The world didn't hand her anything. She had to claim it for herself, and she did quietly, steadily, and with determination. Her move to Tima was another leap of faith. She invested in a tiny cafe, starting small, serving coffee and snacks to anyone who walked through the door. Simultaneously, she expanded her jewelry business, often delivering handmade pieces herself to ensure quality and personal touch. Saving became almost a second job. She would track every sadi, budget carefully, and delay her own wants to prioritize her dream. It took years, but eventually the dream crystallized. A small apartment, hers alone, purchased entirely from her own hard work. That apartment wasn't just a building. It was the embodiment of every late night, every sacrifice, every moment of skepticism turned into determination. It represented her independence, her ability to create a life on her own terms. When her parents later suggested it should go to Nia, they were not just asking for a handover of property. They were disregarding the years of toil, the journey from Kumasi to Tima, and the countless small victories that had made her who she was. And that's why, when Amara raised her glass at the dinner, it wasn't just a toast. It was a declaration of a lifetime of perseverance finally being honored. The room was thick with tension after Amara's toast. Kofi finally broke the silence, his voice a mix of surprise and defensiveness. Amara, we just thought. Nia could really use the apartment. It would help her start her boutique. And you know we always want to support our children. His words hung in the air, polite but heavy with expectation. Abina's tight smile added to the pressure, as she gave a small nod, silently encouraging her husband. Amara set her glass down and met their gaze calmly. Her voice was steady, even, and carried a quiet authority that immediately drew the attention of everyone at the table. I understand that you want to support Nia, she said, but I think it's important to be clear. This apartment is not a gift, and it is not something I am handing over. I bought it with my own money, after years of hard work, late nights, and sacrifices. I am financially independent, and this is mine. Nia's eyes widened, and she opened her mouth, clearly wanting to speak, but Amara held up a hand politely. Please let me finish, she said, her tone firm but not unkind. I've balanced school, work, and responsibilities for years. I saved every sadi I could, worked in the cafe, sold my jewelry, and built this life step by step. I'm proud of that. And it's unfair to assume that because we're family, my hard work should automatically be handed to someone else. Kofi looked taken aback. Amara, we didn't mean to. I know you didn't mean to upset me, Amara interrupted gently. But intentions don't erase the reality. Nia has received support and gifts throughout her life, opportunities that I had to earn for myself. This isn't about refusing to help her or not loving her. It's about acknowledging that my work, my independence, and my boundaries matter too. Nia tried again, nervous. But Amara smiled faintly, holding up her hand once more. Nia, I know you're excited about your boutique, and I want you to succeed. But that doesn't give anyone the right to assume my hard work is up for grabs. I will support you in ways that don't compromise my own independence. The room was quiet now, the weight of her words settling over everyone. Her parents exchanged looks, their earlier certainty shaken. Guests leaned in slightly, sensing the significance of the moment. Amara's calm, unwavering tone had transformed what could have been an awkward argument into a demonstration of dignity and self-respect. Finally, Kofi nodded slowly, as if seeing her determination clearly for the first time. Abina's tight smile softened, and even Nia seemed subdued, realizing she couldn't claim what wasn't hers. Amara's confrontation wasn't loud or aggressive, but it was precise, firm, and unshakable. She had laid out the facts, highlighted the inequity, and asserted her boundary. In that moment, everyone understood that Amara's independence was non-negotiable, and no polite pressure or familial expectation could take it from her. She had turned the confrontation into empowerment, and the balance of respect had shifted unmistakably in her favor. The room remained quiet for a few moments after the confrontation, the tension slowly starting to ease. Kofi cleared his throat and looked at Amara with a mixture of surprise and reluctant respect. I see now how important this is to you, he said softly, his earlier certainty replaced by acknowledgement. Abina's tight smile softened as well, and she nodded slowly, as if trying to reconcile her desire to help Nia with the undeniable truth of Amara's word. Nia, on the other hand, sat back in her chair, crossing her arms and pouting slightly, her usual charm replaced by frustration. She seemed unsure how to respond, realizing that the apartment was not something she could claim or manipulate her way into. The room felt a little awkward, but the awkwardness was coupled with a newfound respect for her. Guests exchanged quiet glances, some offering small smiles of approval, as if silently cheering her for standing her ground without anger or drama. Amara herself remained composed, her calm confidence radiating quietly. She didn't gloat or mock. Instead, she kept the atmosphere balanced, showing that independence didn't have to come with conflict or bitterness. Thank you for understanding, she said gently, raising her glass once more, this time in a simple, gracious gesture. I'm proud of what I've worked for, and I'm happy to share in celebrating each of our successes tonight. Let's enjoy the rest of our dinner together. As the meal continued, the earlier tension gradually gave way to conversation, though a polite restraint lingered in the Kofi and Abina occasionally offered compliments, this time directed toward Amara's achievements rather than nudging Nia. The parents' earlier expectation that she would simply hand over the apartment had faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance of her independence. It was clear that Amara had set a boundary that they would no longer try to cross. Even Nia's mood began to shift, though slowly. She no longer tried to claim the apartment or argue, but she watched Amara with a mix of admiration and sulking curiosity. The family had learned, perhaps a little reluctantly, that Amara was not the type to be swayed by expectation or manipulated through charm. The balance had shifted, and for the first time, Amara felt completely seen for her effort, her sacrifices, and her determination. By the end of the evening, Amara's grace left a lasting impression. She had asserted herself without losing composure, defended her achievements without turning the moment into a fight, and ensured her independence remained intact. As the family began to clear plates and chatter resumed, the earlier tension faded into a quiet acknowledgement of her victory. The dinner ended on a note that was both awkward and respectful, but most importantly, it marked a turning point. Amara's boundaries were clear, her independence recognized, and her sense of self unshakable. The audience could feel the satisfaction, the empowerment, and the relief of seeing a young woman claim what was rightfully hers. And the story of the evening left no doubt. Amara had won, and she had done so with grace. Back in her apartment in Tima, Amara sank into the couch, the soft hum of the city outside her window a quiet contrast to the tension of the night. She poured herself a glass of wine, the deep red swirling gently in the glass, and let herself breathe. The room smelled faintly of fresh coffee and the faint notes of the handmade candles she kept on the shelves, a small comfort, a reminder that this space was entirely hers. She smiled, thinking about the dinner, the sharp silence, and the way the room had shifted when she raised her glass. The pride in her chest wasn't just about the apartment, it was about every late night, every sacrifice, every moment she had chosen persistence over each. She had stood her ground calmly and firmly, and had been seen and respected for it. No shouting, no dramatics, just clarity and independence. Looking around her apartment, Amara felt the weight of her journey settle into something quiet and powerful. Each piece of furniture, every little decoration, every corner of the space spoke of effort and determination. This wasn't just a home. It was a symbol of what she had built with her own hands and her own resolve. She had proven, first to herself and then to everyone else, that her life was hers to shape, and that boundaries were not just necessary, they were sacred. As she took a sip of her wine, Amara allowed herself a moment of pure satisfaction. The world outside could wait. Tonight, she celebrated her independence, her triumph, and the life she was building on her own terms. And in that calm, reflective space, she knew one thing for certain: standing up for yourself, claiming what you've worked for, and honoring your own journey. There was no victory more empowering than that.